Welcome to Wellness with John. I'm John Peters, and these are resources to help you thrive. This is another installment in my series on the contributions of Eastern psychology to the West. And in this video, I'm going to talk about going to hell. Stay tuned. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk about going to hell. But just know I'm not here to give you theological advice about how to go to literal hell or literal heaven, right? But what I'm going to talk about is some ideas that exist in Eastern psychology that pertain to what in the West we could call hellish states or heavenly states, right? And there's some interesting stuff that I'll explain here through some stories that I think is instructive for the proper focus of what we do in therapy in the West, right? As a therapist, again, I'm not here to save somebody's soul. I'm not here to help them get to literal heaven or to avoid literal hell, right? That's not my role. But therapy in the West properly is focused on helping people not be in what we could call hellish states. So miserable sadness of grief or miserable anxiety about whatever, or not having good mood regulation and being uncontrolled in one's anger, right? You know this yourself, that you have lots of moments in your life that you could easily describe as hellish, and you have moments of joy and pleasure that you could easily describe as heavenly, right? And so if we only take the Western version of religious heaven and hell and try to use that in psychology, we could see that as a bit thin because, if you think about it, like hell and heaven are these places that literally exist for a lot of people that you want to avoid one and you want to seek the other one, but you have to live your life in a good way in order to maximize the opportunity to get to heaven after you die in the next life, or to avoid going to hell after you die, right? So we're in this state now, and we're doing things to impact what our state is going to be later, okay? This is an important point and why I'm talking about this contribution of Eastern psychology to the West. Because in Eastern psychology, while there are descriptions, if you look at like Hindu teachings and Buddhist teachings and things like that, there are descriptions and references to what one could understand as like a literal heaven realm and a literal hell realm. And you could end up in one of those in a next life, right? So that's similar to the West. But you also have these stories that inform a way to understand the hellish states and the heavenly states that we experience here during this life, and some interesting instruction about how to work with that, okay? And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. And obviously, I'm also not here to help you get enlightened, which is what some of these Eastern texts are ultimately about in terms of like living a life so that you can enter into supreme nirvana, right? Again, as a Western therapist, I am working with myself and you and others in ways that where our goals are, I want to live a good life. I want to be optimally functioning. I don't want to be too hellish too much of the time. And I want to, have pleasure and joy in my life, right? So that's the proper scope of what therapy is up to in the West, right? But let me give you a couple descriptions of the stuff that I'm talking about in Eastern psychology that informs how to deal with the things that we pay attention to in Western psychology of, wanting to function well and not be miserable and, have pleasure, right? So this will make more sense as we go on. Stick with me. So there's a story from the Hindu literature that existed around the time and before the Buddhism came about 2,500 years ago. And it's about this character, Chitti Garbha, okay? So the original story, the oldest story of this character is this female character whose mother has died, and she's really worried about whether her mother, is going to heaven or hell, and what the mother's status is, because when the mother was alive, the mother spoke badly about the religions and religious leaders. So she said nasty things about Buddhism and things like that. So the daughter, the surviving daughter, goes to see the Buddha and is praying at the temple, and is trying to make merit for her mother to somehow save her from her bad deeds when she was alive. So she's praying at the temple and giving offerings, and she sells everything she has in order to have the offerings to give at the temple, right? So great dedication to this action. And she's praying for her mother's state while at this temple, and she hears this voice, and it's the Buddha talking to her. And so the Buddha says, hey, go home and keep reciting these prayers at home, and you're going to get an answer to your worry about what's up with your mother, right? So the daughter goes home, and she's doing what the voice told her to do, and she's praying at home and reciting these Buddhist mantras and things. And so what happens is that she gets transported to hell, and she gets to hell, and there's this hell guardian there, and the guardian says, hey, I'm here to explain to you what's up with your mother. And so the guardian tells the woman, hey, so your mom did come to hell, but your prayers and your dedications and offerings were so effective that it actually transported your mother out of hell, and she went to heaven. Okay. So this was greatly relieving to the woman, of course, because of her concern for her mother. But then while she was there getting the explanation from the hell guardian, she looks around and sees all the suffering of everybody in hell. And she decides that she's going to take a vow to save everybody in hell, right? So she was effective in saving her mother, and she realizes there are all these people who need to be saved. And so she takes this vow to save all beings out of the hell realm, okay, which was the origin of the so-called bodhisattva vow, okay? So bodhisattvas are these realized saints that haven't quite become fully realized Buddhas, but they're just almost there. And there are these different bodhisattvas with different characteristics. But the bodhisattva vow is, I am going to work to save everybody else so that everybody else can make ultimate progress and take the final step over into final enlightenment. And I'm going to hang back and help everybody do that. And I will remain and be the last person to take that last step into final nirvana. So I won't take my last step into ultimate realization until everybody else has made it across before me, and my task is going to be to help everybody do that. Okay, so that's the bodhisattva vow in Buddhism. So Kshitigarbha is this story about the origin of the bodhisattva vow, right? Now, Kshitigarbha morphs into different characters in different cultures, right? And is called different names, okay? So in Japan, the character is called Jizo. In Korea, it's called Chijang Posal, right? So the same character shows up then through the development of Buddhist psychology and Buddhist philosophy in East Asia, right? And so the character in Korea and Japan, it becomes this character that's central in Zen practice. So Zen is a form of Buddhism. Not all Buddhists are Zen Buddhists, but all Zen Buddhists are Buddhist, right? But so Zen Buddhism contains its own versions of these ideas about the bodhisattvas, right? So in Zen Buddhism, for example, with Chijang Posal and Jizo, you have the same character who has taken the bodhisattva vow. So that characteristic remains, right? But instead of an emphasis on what's called filial piety, or right, so the dedication to those closely related to you, which was in that original story, in Zen Buddhism, you have this idea that Kshitigarbha, Jizo, Chijang Posao, is this character that sometimes is depicted as a wandering monk, but has this staff. And the staff has 6 rings at the top, okay? And the 6 rings are representative of 6 different qualities, and the staff is called the hell-shattering staff. So in the depictions of Jizo, Jizo has a staff. It's called the hell-shattering staff. It has 6 rings, and the 6 rings stand for benevolence, courage, equanimity, being fully responsible for all that one should be fully responsible for, including the salvation of all sentient beings, being fully engaged with all aspects of life. So not being aversive or sticking your head in the sand, but being fully engaged with everything that you need to be engaged with, okay? And being unquenchably optimistic, right? So if you think about it, this then gives an instruction, not only like, how can I be ultimately enlightened, which is kind of what the core of Buddhist philosophy and practice is about, but it gives an instruction that is actually applicable to us in the West, because one could then interpret that to mean that Jizo has this hell-shattering staff, and it's called the hell-shattering staff because it can shatter the hell of a person in a hellish state, okay? Not just sitting in literal hell like in the original story. And the other thing about Jizo is described as being able to replicate himself into an innumerable number, like however many Jizos there need to be in any given moment, Jizo can replicate himself into all those Jizos. And so that means that if I am suffering a hellish state, I found myself in hell. Let's say that I got into an argument with my partner and we're really mad at each other and we can't resolve the argument and we're miserable and angry. Okay, that's a hellish state. Okay, so what Buddhist psychology says is that if I want to invoke Jizo, right? This is not like Superman coming in to save me or Jesus, saving me from my sins, but it's about calling on this idea, right? Jizo as a concept could be invoked while I'm in an emotionally miserable, hellish state. And so, in a way, this hell-shattering staff of Jizo has the power to shatter my hells. So, put differently, what one could say is that if I'm in a hellish state, let's say angry and upset and sad because of an argument, could it be possible that if I'm able to invoke and express, to be in touch with one or more of these 6 qualities, benevolence, courage, equanimity, which means being stable and not battered around too much, being fully responsible, being fully engaged, being unquenchably optimistic, right? You could easily imagine that one or more of those states, those qualities, could help me in my hellish state in order to mitigate how hellish it is and potentially help me resolve it and get out of hell, right? So I enter a hellish state when I'm emotionally miserable. I shatter hell by using the positive qualities, and then I am out of the hell, right? So again, we're not talking about how do you behave in this life so that after you die in the next life, are you in heaven or hell? We're talking about what goes on moment to moment in this life when you enter a more hellish state and you want to get out of it, right? So this is an interesting way of interpreting the Kshitigarbha Jizo story, to say that it's instructive that if I'm in some sort of hell state of misery in my human life, that one way to cope with that and to improve it is to work with these qualities, right? So to try to work with equanimity, benevolence, courage, being responsible, being engaged, being optimistic, right? So to me, it's an interesting instruction on not only can I bring those particular 6 qualities to bear on a hellish state, but even if we quibble about whether those are the 6, one could easily imagine the idea that when we're in hell, we try to bring our strengths, our capacities to bear on the situation so that we can cope effectively and improve the situation, change it for the better, right? It also then potentially raises this question of, would it be good to identify qualities in order to have a better capacity to surf the complexities of life in order to not get stuck in hell, right? Again, the hell shattering staff is representative of a collection of qualities that shatter hells. And so if I translate that into in my life, I don't want to get stuck in hellish states too much. Could it be that if I work on being more courageous, being more benevolent, having equanimity, being responsible, being optimistic, being fully engaged, and maybe other qualities too, but could I work on developing those capacities, right? And again, this correlates well with our idea in the West that if we identify our values, we identify our strengths, we try to have our capacities emerge and we develop them, then we're going to cope more effectively with life. We're going to live a more meaningful, satisfied, happy life, right? And be more satisfied with ourselves and being the type of people that we want to be in the world, right? So interesting way to think about that. And again, I'm not talking about ultimate enlightenment. I'm not talking about avoiding actual heaven, actual hell in the next life. But I'm talking about how we can use these ideas from Eastern psychology to inform how we want to get along in our Western lives, even if you're not a Buddhist, even if you're not religious, right? This is not about being a Buddhist. It's not about being a Christian, about accepting or rejecting some tradition. This is about the fact that we're all emotional creatures. We're all psychological creatures, and we all have moments of heaven and hell, right? Similarly, in terms of seeking heaven in the East, again, from the same period, the late Upanishads period in Hindu philosophy into early Buddhism, you have this idea of the Brahma Viharas, which is the four heavenly abodes, right? Or the four sublime emotional states, right? Which is kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy of the joy of others, and equanimity, right? Again, the idea is obviously in a pure sense, if you do that stuff, then you might be more likely to get enlightened. But from an emotional standpoint, a psychological standpoint, you're more likely to be in a pleasurable state that's deeply pleasurable, not just hedonistic sense pleasure, if you develop kindness, if you develop compassion, if you develop sympathetic joy with others, I'm happy that you're happy, that kind of thing. And if you have equanimity, if you have those four qualities, then it promotes the idea of being in a more satisfyingly pleasurable, heavenly state in your life, and thus avoiding hellish states. So anyway, I hope this is interesting to you. If you like this kind of content, hit the like button below. If you have yet to subscribe to my channel, please do so. And feel free to comment because it's interesting feedback for me, and share it widely if you like this or any of my videos on the channel. All right. And I'll see you in an upcoming video.